So when I first introduced these types of systems, a linear and quadratic, I said, okay, we've got a couple of ways we can do this. We can multiply through by -1 and then add the 2, or we could use substitution. Today on the assignment, I want you to focus primarily on substitution, okay? I don't want you to mess with the adding and the subtracting because it gets pretty confusing when we have our x and x squared sometimes. I just want us to practice the substitution method today on our work today. So when we do that, part of the reason why I had you do the work on the Bell work was to identify where some of them are easier to solve for than others. And that's what we want to look for, is the variable that's the easiest to solve for, and then go from there. So like right here in the second equation, it would be much easier to solve for y. All we have to do is add 2x to both sides, right? And then we could substitute in the first equation. If we wanted to solve for or isolate x, we have to subtract y, divide by 2. We're working with fractions. Even though fractions are our friends, they add a little bit extra work to our problems. Okay. And then or on like example, or the equation on number 1. Very simple, just to add x squared to the other side, and we've isolated y. But if we want to isolate x, it takes a little more work, like number 3 on our Bell work. So in this case, then also what you want to look for is which equation would be easier to isolate a variable in. In this case, either one would be okay to isolate y, correct? We could do either one. So I am going to isolate y on the first equation. Just for fun, okay? So let's do that. So I'm going to rewrite my first equation here. Y minus x squared equals a -4. And I want to isolate y. So I'm going to do what to both sides? Add x squared. So that gives me y equals, and I always like to put my variable first, x squared minus 4. So we're going to use substitution. I worked with the first equation, so that means I'm going to substitute into the other equation. So I know y equals x squared minus 4. So for where I see y here, I'm going to put what? I'm going to put x squared minus 4 because that's what y equals. So now I'm going to go right below here, and I'm going to write x squared minus 4 minus 2x equals a -1. So in doing this, in isolating and then substituting, I should have gotten rid of one of my variables. Right? Now I'm just down to x, which is good. So I have a quadratic equation. That means I have a squared variable. In order to solve it, the surefire way, although we're going to look at other ways later, surefire way is to use the quadratic formula. So in order to do that, I have to get everything on one side equal to 0, and then change the order here around. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides, because that -1 is over there by itself. And then I'm going to rearrange what I have on the left. So that's going to give me a -3, but I need to put that at the end because that's my constant. So I'm going to go x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. And now I'm able to identify A, B, and C to use in the quadratic formula. A is 1, B is -2, and C is -3. Okay, so now I'm ready to use the quadratic formula. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So opposite of b, let me go, because we're doing something different here. We're going to do the quadratic formula. So opposite of b, so opposite of a -2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, which is a negative 2, over 2a, 2 times a, which is 2 times 1. This is going to tell us which variable. What are we solving for here? Which variable?
The negative 2 of the...
This should be 3. Yep. Thank you. And we are solving for x because that's what our quadratic equation was in. That's the variable it was in. Sometimes we'll isolate x and plug it in, and then we'll have y squared left. So when we do quadratic, we're finding y. But in this case, it's x. Everything else look okay on that? Good to go? Okay. So now I just do some simplifying, and that's going to be 2 plus or minus. I get 4 minus 4 times 1 times a negative 3 is a negative 12 over 2. So that gives me 2 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. And the square root of 16 is 4. So I have 2 plus or minus 4 over 2. So my 2x values are going to come from, I'm going to add 4 and divide by 2, and then subtract 4 and divide by 2. So x will equal 2 plus 4 over 2 to minus 4 over 2. And the plus, so I'm using this plus or minus right here. That's how I'm getting those two equations. 2 plus 4, there we go. 2 minus 4, there we go. So then simplifying, 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 over 2 is 3. 2 minus 4 is a negative 2. Negative 2 over 2 is a negative 1. Everything look good so far? You agree with my work? Okay, awesome. So we have x, but our equation, our system is in 2 variables, x and y. So we need to find y now. I'm going to use the second equation to help me find y. So my second equation is y minus 2x equals a negative 1. So I'm going to let x equals 3 and plug that in, because that's 3 is one of my x values. And then I'm going to go y minus 2x equals a negative 1 and let x equal negative 1, because that's another x value for my 2x values. Okay, so where I have x, I'm going to put a negative 3 in this first equation. So y minus 2 times a negative 3 equals a negative 1. So that's y plus 6 equal a negative 1. I'm going to subtract 6 over. I don't have enough room to do that. It's a positive 3. I don't know why I'm doing a negative in there. Thank you. I'd say I did that on purpose, but I didn't. So it's minus 6, right? Okay. And then I'm going to add 6 over, so that's going to give me y equals 5. I don't have enough room for that. Is that right? Okay. So y equals 5. That's going to give me the points 3, 5. When x is 3, y is 5. Now I go to the second equation for my second x value, which is a negative 1. And I'll write y minus 2 times a negative 1 equals a negative 1. Y plus 2 equals a negative 1, and then I'll subtract 2 over. So y is a negative 3. Does that look right? So that gives me the point negative 1, negative 3. So this parabola, which is the first equation, quadratic equation and line intersect in these 2 points. Okay, so today's work, I want you to use substitution on your problems, all right? And you have a worksheet. So go to your homework